He told her she was hysterical, that her pregnancy hormones were making her irrational. As Thea clutched her baby bump, listening to her husband, Sophia, list her emotional failings, she never imagined his final words to her that night would be, "Get out." He kicked her out, pregnant and sobbing, into the cold, unforgiving night. But what Sophia didn't know was that while he was sleeping soundly in their marital bed, Thea wasn't just crying. She was coding. She was building. And by the time the sun rose, a single headline would shatter his entire world. Forbes announces groundbreaking AI startup. The founder, Thea. The polished oak door clicked shut with a deafening finality, the sound echoing the shattering of Thea's world. Outside the San Francisco night air, usually a comforting, familiar embrace, felt sharp and hostile, each gust of wind a biting reminder of Sophia's cold, dismissive words. "You're being hysterical, Thea." He had sneered, his voice a venomous whisper that had coiled around her heart, squeezing it tight. "It's the hormones. They're making you irrational." She stood on the top step of their meticulously restored Victorian home, a place she had poured her heart and soul into, a place she had believed was their forever home. Her hand instinctively went to her burgeoning belly, a protective gesture over the tiny life that was a part of both of them, a life that Sophia now seemed to resent as much as he resented her tears. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. He had been the one to push for a baby, eager to cement their status as the perfect power couple. He the rising star at a prestigious venture capital firm, and she the brilliant but conveniently unemployed software engineer, the perfect supporting actress in the grand play of his life. The fight had started, as most of them did lately, over something trivial, a misplaced set of keys, but it had quickly escalated a spark in a tinderbox of unspoken resentments and simmering frustrations. Sophia, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit even at 9 in the evening, had paced the living room like a caged panther. His every movement a study in controlled aggression. He had accused her of being careless, of being forgetful, of being a mess. But what he was really saying, what lay beneath the surface of his carefully chosen words, was that she was no longer the woman he had married. She was no longer the effortlessly chic, always composed and endlessly supportive partner who had been his greatest asset. She was pregnant. She was emotional. She was an inconvenience. "I can't deal with this, Thea," he had said, his voice laced with a weary exasperation that cut her deeper than any shout could have. "I have a multi-million-dollar deal on the line, and I come home to this." To tears and drummer over a set of keys. "They're your keys, Sophia," she had whispered, her voice trembling. "And I'm not being dramatic. I'm just tired. And I'm scared. Things are changing so fast." He had laughed then, a short, humorless sound that had made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. "Scared, you're scared. Try having the weight of the world on your shoulders, Thea. Try being responsible for something more than just gestating." The word had hung in the air between them, ugly and dehumanizing. It was the moment she had realized that he didn't see her as a partner anymore. He saw her as a vessel, a means to an end. And now she was a malfunctioning one. "Get out," he had said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "I need some space. I need to think." "Sophia, please," she had begged, tears streaming down her face. "It's late. Where will I go?" "I don't know, Thea," he had replied, turning his back on her, a gesture of complete and utter dismissal. "Call your sister. Call a friend." Just go." And so she had. She had grabbed her purse and her laptop, the two items that felt most like her own, and had walked out of the life she had so carefully built. Her sister Chloe lived in Portland, a 6-hour drive away. Too far for tonight. Her friends, they were his friends too. Couples they socialized with people who saw them as the golden couple. To call them now would be to admit that the facade had crumbled, that their perfect life was a lie. She sank down onto the cold, unforgiving steps of her own home, a pariah on her own doorstep. The city lights twinkled below a sea of indifferent stars. She felt a profound and terrifying sense of aloneness, a feeling she hadn't experienced since she was a lonely, awkward teenager who had found solace in the logical, predictable world of code. Code. The thought was a lifeline in the swirling vortex of her despair. For years, her brilliance in software engineering had been a source of pride, a defining feature of her identity. She had been a rising star in her own right before she had met Sophia with a promising career at a top tech firm. But then he had come along with his dazzling smile and his grand ambitions, and he had convinced her that his dreams were big enough for the both of them. He had encouraged her to quit her job, to focus on building their life together. A life that she now realized had been built entirely on his terms. A wave of nausea washed over her, a familiar companion in her pregnancy. But this time, it was different. It was a visceral reaction to the truth she had been so blind to for so long. Sophia had not just been unsupportive. He had been systematically dismantling her confidence, her independence, her very sense of self. He had isolated her, convincing her that his world was the only one that mattered, that her own ambitions were trivial in comparison. But as she sat there in the darkness, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. He had called her emotional irrational. He had reduced her to a collection of raging hormones. But he had forgotten who she was before she had become Mrs. Sophia Vance. He had forgotten the girl who had won national coding competitions, the woman who had seen the world not as a series of chaotic, unpredictable events, but as a system of problems waiting to be solved. And in that moment, a new kind of resolve hardened within her. He wanted to see what she was capable of. He thought she was just a gestating vessel. She would show him. She would show them all. With trembling fingers, she opened her laptop. The familiar glow of the screen was a comfort, a portal back to a world where she was in control, where logic and innovation reigned supreme. For months, an idea had been percolating in the back of her mind, a project she had tinkered with in her spare moments, a secret she had kept from Sophia because she knew he would dismiss it as another one of her hobbies. It was an AI-powered platform designed to help female entrepreneurs connect with investors, a tool to level the playing field in a world that was still so heavily skewed towards men. She had named it Athena's Ascent, a nod to the goddess of wisdom and warfare, a symbol of the strength and resilience she now felt surging through her veins. As the first lines of code appeared on the screen, a sense of calm washed over her. The familiar syntax, the logical flow, it was a language she understood, a world where she was fluent. The tears still fell, but now they were tears of rage, of determination, of a woman who was finally blessedly waking up. She worked through the night, fueled by a potent cocktail of heartbreak and adrenaline. The city slept unaware of the quiet revolution happening on a doorstep in Pacific Heights. The world was about to change, and it was all because a man had made the colossal mistake of underestimating the woman he had just kicked out into the cold. By sunrise, Thea wasn't just going to be a scorned wife. She was going to be a force to be reckoned with. And Sophia Vance was about to learn that hell hath no fury, like a woman with a laptop and a billion-dollar idea. The first blush of dawn painted the San Francisco sky in hues of soft pink and fiery orange, a stark contrast to the darkness that had enveloped Thea for what felt like an eternity. She was still on the steps of her former home, her laptop perched precariously on her knees, her body aching with a fatigue that went bone deep. But her mind was on fire. As the city began to stir, a new kind of energy pulsed through her. The anger was still there, a hot, molten core in the pit of her stomach. But it was now overlaid with a thrilling, terrifying sense of possibility. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, truly herself. She had spent the night not just coding, but strategizing. She had refined the business plan for Athena's ascent, fleshed out the user interface, and even drafted a press release. It was audacious, it was insane, but it was also brilliant. She knew it in her gut, the same way she knew that the baby growing inside her was a girl. With a deep breath, she took the plunge. She uploaded the press release to a platform that distributed it to a curated list of tech journalists and news outlets. She knew it was a long shot, that it would probably get lost in the deluge of 1,000 other announcements. But she had to try. Then she did something even bolder. She remembered a contact from her old life, a journalist named Sarah Jenkins who worked for Forbes. They had met at a tech conference years ago, and Sarah had been impressed by a presentation Thea had given on the future of AI. They had exchanged cards, and on a whim, Thea had saved the number. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she composed the email. She kept it short, professional, and to the point. She introduced Athena's ascent, highlighted its unique value proposition, and attached the press release. She didn't mention her personal situation, didn't even hint at the drama unfolding in her life. She let the idea speak for itself. As she hit send, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, and the emotional and physical toll of the last 12 hours was catching up with her. She knew she couldn't stay on these steps forever. She needed a safe place, a place to regroup, a place to figure out what came next. With a heavy heart, she booked a room at a boutique hotel downtown, a place where she could be anonymous, where she could lick her wounds in private. The walk to the hotel was a blur. The city was waking up, people rushing to work, to their lives, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in hers. Once in her hotel room, she collapsed onto the bed, the plush duvet, a welcome comfort after the cold, hard steps. She allowed herself a few moments of self-pity, a few moments to mourn the life she had lost. But then she forced herself to sit up. There was no time for wallowing. She had a new life to build, a new future to create. She ordered room service, a feast of everything she had been craving, and as she ate, she felt her strength returning. She opened her laptop again, this time to a different screen, her online banking portal. Her heart sank as she saw the balance. Sophia had been the primary breadwinner, and while she had her own savings, they were modest. Enough to last a few months, maybe, but not enough to launch a startup. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping dread. What had she done? Had she just thrown away her last bit of security on a pipe dream? And then her phone buzzed. An email. The subject line made her breath catch in her throat. Forbes urgent inquiry. Athena's ascent. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was from Sarah Jenkins. She had read the press release, and she was intrigued. She wanted to schedule a call, immediately. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from her chest, a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. It was happening. It was actually happening. The call with Sarah was a whirlwind. Thea, running on pure adrenaline, pitched Athena's ascent with a passion and clarity that surprised even herself. She spoke of the systemic biases in the venture capital world, the untapped potential of female entrepreneurs, the power of AI to create a more equitable future. She didn't have to fake the passion. It was born of her own painful experience, her own recent and brutal awakening. Sarah was hooked. "This isn't just a startup, Thea," she had said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "This is a movement, and you're at the forefront of it." By the end of the call, Sarah had made a decision. She wasn't just going to write a small piece about Athena's ascent. She was going to feature it on the cover of Forbes' digital edition. Thea was speechless. It was a dream come true, a fantasy she had never even dared to entertain, and it was happening to her now in the midst of the darkest moment of her life. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Photo shoots, interviews, fact-checking. Thea, still in the same clothes she had been wearing when Sophia had kicked her out, found herself being treated like a VIP, a visionary, a star. The irony was almost too much to bear. And then it was done. The article was live. The headline in bold, stark letters screamed from the Forbes homepage. "He kicked his pregnant wife out for being too emotional." By sunrise, her startup was on Forbes. Thea stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. Sarah had, with Thea's hesitant permission, included the human element, the dramatic backstory. It was a risk, but Sarah had insisted it was what would make the story resonate, what would make it go viral. And she was right. Within minutes, the story was everywhere. It was trending on Twitter. It was being shared on Facebook. It was being dissected on Reddit. The name Thea Vance was on everyone's lips. And then the emails started pouring in. From venture capitalists who had once ignored her. From female entrepreneurs who saw her as a hero. From women all over the world who had been made to feel small, to feel emotional, to feel like they weren't enough. Her phone rang a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Thea, it's Chloe." Tears sprang to Thea's eyes at the sound of her sister's voice. "Chloe," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "How did you—" "It's everywhere, Leah." Chloe said, her voice a mixture of awe and concern. "Are you okay? Where are you?" I'm in a hotel," Thea said, a fresh wave of tears streaming down her face. "Chloe, I'm on my way," Chloe said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I'm getting on the next flight to San Francisco. Don't you worry about a thing. Your big sister is coming." As she hung up the phone, a sense of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over her. She wasn't alone. She had her sister. She had an army of women she had never even met cheering her on. And she had Athena's ascent. Her new life had just begun. And as she looked out the hotel window at the city that had once been her prison, she now saw it for what it was. A city of endless possibilities. A city where a woman who had been kicked to the curb could rise up and conquer the world. And as for Sophia, she hadn't heard from him yet. But she knew it was only a matter of time. And when he did call, she would be ready. The tables had turned. The power had shifted. And Thea Vance was just getting started. The silence from Sophia was more unnerving than any angry voicemail or furious text message could have been. In the whirlwind that had become her life, the absence of his reaction was a gaping void, a storm cloud on the horizon that promised a deluge. Chloe arrived like a force of nature, all righteous indignation and fierce protective love. She enveloped Thea in a hug that felt like coming home, her presence a solid grounding force in the chaos. "I can't believe he did that to you," Chloe fumed, pacing the hotel room like a caged tigress. "That man is a monster, a soulless, egomaniacal monster." Thea, for the first time in days, allowed herself to be taken care of. Chloe ordered food, drew her a bath, and listened as Thea recounted the entire sordid tale, her voice breaking at times, but her resolve never wavering. "He didn't just kick me out, Chloe," Thea said, her voice low and intense. "He tried to erase me. He made me believe that I was nothing without him." "Well, he was wrong," Chloe said, her eyes flashing, "and now the whole world knows it." The Forbes article had taken on a life of its own. It had been picked up by major news outlets, discussed on morning talk shows, and had sparked a global conversation about sexism in the tech industry. Thea was no longer just a woman who had been wronged. She was a symbol, a beacon of hope for women everywhere. The influx of investment offers was staggering. Venture capital firms that wouldn't have given her the time of day a week ago were now clamoring for a piece of Athena's ascent. The valuation of her fledgling company had skyrocketed into the stratosphere. She was, to put it mildly, the hottest ticket in town. With Chloe by her side, Thea began to navigate this new dizzying reality. They hired a lawyer, a powerhouse of a woman named Isabella Rossi, who specialized in high-stakes divorces and corporate law. Isabella, with her sharp wit and even sharper suits, was exactly the kind of ally Thea needed. "We're going to hit him where it hurts, Thea," Isabella had said, her eyes glinting with a predatory light. "His wallet and his reputation." And then finally the call came. It was a Sunday afternoon, a week after she had been kicked out. Thea was in a conference room with Chloe and Isabella, strategizing their next move, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "It's him," she whispered, her blood turning to ice. Isabella nodded. "Put him on speaker." Thea took a deep breath and answered the call. "Hello, Thea." Sophia's voice was a low, controlled rumble, but she could hear the undercurrent of fury. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Sophia," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "You've created a media circus. You're trying to ruin me." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Ruin you? You're the one who threw his pregnant wife out on the street." "You were being emotional," he said, the familiar condescension creeping back into his voice. "I needed space. And I needed a husband," she retorted, her voice rising. "A partner, not a ruthless businessman who sees his wife as a liability." "This is not a conversation for the phone," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I'm coming over to your hotel." "No, you're not." Isabella's voice cut in sharp and authoritative. "Mr. Vance, you will have no further contact with my client. Any and all communication will go through me. Is that understood?" There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Sophia was not used to being challenged, especially not by a woman. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Isabella Rossi," she replied coolly. "Thea's legal counsel, and I suggest you get yourself a good lawyer, Mr. Vance. You're going to need one." With that, she ended the call. The room was silent for a moment, and then Chloe let out a whoop of triumph. "That was brilliant!" Thea felt a surge of adrenaline. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was finally beginning to recede, replaced by a steely determination. The next few weeks were a blur of legal battles and business negotiations. Sophia, as expected, came out swinging. His lawyers tried to paint Thea as an unstable, vindictive woman who was using her pregnancy to extort money from him. They even tried to claim that Athena's ascent was his idea, that she had stolen his intellectual property. But they were no match for Isabella Rossi. She systematically dismantled their arguments, presenting evidence of Sophia's emotional abuse, his controlling behavior, and his attempts to sabotage Thea's career. And then came the bombshell. During the discovery process, Isabella's team unearthed a series of emails between Sophia and the senior partners at his firm. In them, he openly discussed his wife problem, complaining about her pregnancy and her emotional instability. He had even gone so far as to suggest that he was considering cutting her loose once the baby was born. The emails were a smoking gun, undeniable proof of his callousness and his deceit. When they were leaked to the press, the public outcry was deafening. Sophia's firm, facing a PR nightmare, had no choice but to fire him. His career, the one he had prized above all else, was in tatters. The divorce settlement was swift and brutal. Thea got everything she wanted, the house a significant portion of his assets, and full ownership of Athena's ascent. It was a complete and utter victory. But for Thea, it wasn't about the money or the revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking back her power, her voice, her life. And as she signed the final divorce papers, a sense of closure washed over her. The chapter of her life with Sophia Vance was finally blessedly over. She was free. And she was about to embark on the greatest adventure of her life, not just as a CEO, but as a mother. Her baby, the tiny life that had been at the center of this storm, was due in a few short months. And Thea knew with a certainty that resonated in her very soul that she was going to give her daughter a life filled with love, strength, and endless possibilities. A life that she and she alone had created. With the divorce finalized and Sophia a ghost of her past, Thea should have felt nothing but triumph. Athena's ascent was a phenomenon. The initial seed funding had ballooned into a 9-figure valuation, and the platform was already making a tangible impact, connecting hundreds of female founders with the capital they needed to thrive. Thea was a media darling, a celebrated feminist icon, and a soon-to-be mother. From the outside, her life was a fairy tale. But a new insidious unease had begun to creep in a subtle discord in the symphony of her success. It centered around Chloe. Her sister, her rock, her fiercest defender, had seamlessly transitioned into the role of CEO of Athena's ascent. It had seemed like a natural fit. Chloe was organized, ruthless in negotiation, and fiercely loyal. Thea, busy with product development and being the public face of the company, had been grateful to hand over the operational reins. The first crack appeared during a board meeting. They were discussing a potential acquisition, a smaller tech company that had developed a complementary algorithm. Thea was hesitant, concerned that the acquisition would dilute their core mission. "I think we should pass," Thea said, looking around the boardroom at the faces of her investors and advisors. "It doesn't feel right. It's not who we are." "Nonsense, Leah." Chloe's voice, sharp and confident, cut across the room. "From a business perspective, it's a no-brainer. It will increase our market share by 15% overnight." She presented a series of slides filled with data and projections that made a compelling if cold case for the acquisition. The board was swayed. Thea, feeling a strange sense of being outmaneuvered, reluctantly agreed. It was a small thing, a difference in business strategy, but it left a bitter taste in her mouth. She had built this company on intuition, on a feeling, and Chloe was reducing it to a set of numbers on a spreadsheet. The incidents began to accumulate, small but significant. Chloe would make executive decisions without consulting her. She would speak for the company in interviews, subtly reframing its origin story to emphasize her own role. She started dressing in power suits that mirrored Isabella Rossi's her demeanor, becoming more and more imperious. Thea tried to tell herself it was just stress, the pressure of running a multi-million-dollar company. She tried to talk to Chloe to reconnect with the sister she knew and loved, but their conversations were stilted and formal, filled with business jargon and talk of quarterly reports. The warmth, the easy intimacy they had once shared was gone. The true betrayal, when it came, was as swift and brutal as Sophia's initial act of cruelty. It happened during a routine check-in with her legal team. Isabella Rossi, her face grim, had requested an urgent in-person meeting. "Thea," Isabella began, her voice unusually gentle. "We were conducting a standard audit of the company's financials, and we found something irregular." She slid a folder across the polished mahogany table. Thea opened it, her hands trembling. Inside were copies of wire transfers, bank statements, and shell company registrations. The beneficiary of a series of large, unauthorized transfers from Athena's Ascent's accounts was a corporation she had never heard of. "I don't understand," Thea whispered, her blood running cold. "What is this? That corporation," Isabella said, her voice tight with anger, "is owned by your sister." The words didn't compute. Chloe. Her. Chloe. It was impossible. A mistake. A misunderstanding. But the evidence was undeniable, a meticulous paper trail of deceit. Chloe had been systematically embezzling money from the company, funneling millions into a secret account. And then came the final devastating blow. Isabella produced another document, a signed agreement. It was a deal memo outlining the terms of a hostile takeover of Athena's Ascent. Chloe had been colluding with a rival venture capital firm, a notoriously predatory company run by a man named Marcus Thorne. They were planning to oust Thea as CEO, using the embezzled funds to buy out her majority shares. Thea felt the room spin, the air sucked from her lungs. This was a betrayal so profound, so personal, it made Sophia's actions seem almost benign in comparison. Sophia had been a selfish, cruel man. But Chloe was her sister, her blood, the one person in the world she had thought she could trust implicitly. "Why?" The word was a raw, ragged whisper. Isabella's expression softened with a pained sympathy. "I did some digging into Marcus Thorne. He and Chloe, they have a history. They were involved years ago before she met her ex-husband. It seems he's been manipulating her, preying on some old resentment she has towards you." Resentment. Thea's mind reeled. She had always been the golden child, the brilliant one. Chloe had lived in her shadow, a fact that had always pained Thea. She had tried to make up for it, to support Chloe, to champion her. But it seemed a deep, festering jealousy had taken root, a poison that had now turned her sister against her. The pieces clicked into place. Chloe's ambition, her coldness, her single-minded focus on the bottom line. It hadn't been about building Athena's Ascent. It had been about taking it, about proving once and for all that she was just as smart, just as capable, just as ruthless as her brilliant younger sister. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. She had survived her husband's betrayal, had risen from the ashes, had built an empire. But this felt like a mortal wound. How could she fight her own sister? How could she expose her ruin, send her to prison? But as she looked down at her swollen belly, at the life that was so close to entering the world, a new kind of resolve hardened within her. She was not just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her daughter's future, for the legacy she wanted to leave behind. And that legacy would not be one of betrayal and deceit. "What do we do?" Thea asked, her voice no longer a whisper, but a cold, hard statement of intent. Isabella's predatory glint returned to her eyes. "We fight back," she said, "and we make sure that when the dust settles, you are the only one left standing." The battle for Athena's ascent was about to begin, and this time it was personal. The days that followed were a masterclass in strategic warfare orchestrated by the brilliant and ruthless Isabella Rossi. Thea, her heart a leaden weight in her chest, had to compartmentalize her pain, transforming her grief into a cold, calculated fury. This was no longer a family squabble. It was a corporate coup, and she had to act like the CEO she was. Their first move was to quietly freeze the accounts Chloe had access to, cutting off her supply line. They did it under the guise of a system-wide security upgrade, a move so subtle that Chloe wouldn't suspect a thing until it was too late. Next, Isabella leveraged her network of contacts in the tech and finance worlds. She began to subtly leak information about Marcus Thorne's predatory practices, his history of hostile takeovers, and his reputation for gutting companies for a quick profit. The narrative she was weaving was a powerful one. Marcus Thorne was a vulture, and Athena's ascent, a beacon of female empowerment, was his next target. Thea, meanwhile, had her own role to play. She had to maintain the illusion of normalcy, to pretend that she was oblivious to her sister's treachery. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to do. Every meeting with Chloe was a performance, every forced smile a betrayal of her own heart. The climax of their counter-offensive was planned for the annual shareholder meeting a week away. It was there that Chloe and Marcus Thorne intended to spring their trap to announce their takeover bid and force Thea out. But they had no idea that Thea and Isabella were setting a trap of their own. In the days leading up to the meeting, Thea worked tirelessly. She met with her loyal investors one by one, not revealing the full extent of Chloe's betrayal, but instead painting a picture of an outside threat, a corporate raider who threatened to destroy everything they had built. She appealed to their sense of loyalty, to their belief in the mission of Athena's ascent. She secured their proxy votes, their unwavering support. Then she did something that felt both terrifying and necessary. She reached out to Sarah Jenkins, the Forbes journalist, who had broken her story. She told her everything, the whole sordid tale of her sister's betrayal. She gave her the evidence, the bank statements, the deal memo. It was a huge risk, but she was banking on Sarah's integrity, on her commitment to the truth. "I'm going to run this story," Sarah had said, her voice a mixture of shock and professional excitement. "But I'll hold it until you give me the signal." The day of the shareholder meeting dawned grey and foreboding. Thea dressed in a custom-made maternity dress of deep crimson. A colour of power and defiance walked into the boardroom with a confidence she did not feel. Chloe was already there, standing next to Marcus Thorne. She looked radiant, triumphant, a woman on the verge of getting everything she had ever wanted. She gave Thea a tight, condescending smile. "Ready for the big day, sis?" Thea met her gaze, her own expression unreadable. "You have no idea." The meeting began as expected, the usual reports, the financial summaries, and then Marcus Thorne stood up to speak. "As many of you know," he began, his voice smooth and reptilian, "I have been in negotiations to acquire a controlling interest in this company. It is my belief that with my firm's resources and expertise, we can take Athena's ascent to the next level." He then proceeded to lay out his plan. A vision that involved mass layoffs, a shift in focus from social impact to pure profit, and the dissolution of the very principles upon which the company had been founded. As he spoke, Thea watched the faces of her investors. They were horrified. This was not the future they had signed up for. And then it was Chloe's turn to speak. She stood up, her voice ringing with a false sincerity. "I know this may come as a shock to some of you," she said, "but I believe that this is the best path forward for the company. I have been working closely with Mr. Thorne to ensure a smooth transition, and I am confident that under his leadership, Athena's ascent will reach its full potential." She looked at Thea, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "And that is why I am formally announcing my support for his acquisition bid, and why I will be voting my shares in his favor." The room was in an uproar, but before anyone could react, Thea stood up. "Thank you, Chloe," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the chaos. "Thank you for making that so easy." She looked at Isabella, who gave her a slight nod, and then she gave the signal. On the large screen behind the boardroom table where Chloe's spreadsheets had been displayed, just moments before, a new image appeared. It was the headline of Sarah Jenkins's article, which had just gone live, "The Ultimate Betrayal: How the COO of Athena's Ascent Tried to Sell Out Her Sister and Destroy a Feminist Empire." The room fell into a stunned silence. The article, with its damning evidence and shocking revelations, was projected for all to see. The wire transfers, the deal memo, the secret emails between Chloe and Marcus Thorne. It was all there in black and white. Chloe's face went white as a sheet. Marcus Thorne, for the first time, looked flustered, his reptilian composure cracking. And then, one by one, the investors began to speak. They condemned the hostile takeover attempt. They expressed their unwavering support for Thea. And they called for Chloe's immediate resignation. The coup had not just failed. It had imploded in the most public and humiliating way possible. Chloe, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and despair, looked at Thea. "I hate you," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "I know." Thea replied, her own voice thick with a sorrow that was almost suffocating. "And that's the tragedy of it all." Chloe turned and fled the room, a pariah in the company she had tried to steal. Marcus Thorne, his reputation in tatters, slunk out behind her, his dreams of conquest reduced to ash. Thea, her legs trembling, sank back into her chair. She had won. She had saved her company. But the victory felt hollow, the price unbearably high. She had lost her sister, the last remaining piece of her family, and as a single tear traced a path down her cheek, she wondered if the wounds of this betrayal would ever truly heal. The fallout from the disastrous shareholder meeting was swift and brutal. Chloe became a pariah, not just in the tech world, but in the wider business community. The Forbes article had gone viral, even more so than the first one, and the story of her betrayal had painted her as a modern-day Lady Macbeth, a cautionary tale of greed and jealousy. Marcus Thorne's firm was hit with a wave of investor withdrawals and a series of lawsuits from other companies he had targeted. His empire, built on a foundation of intimidation and deceit, began to crumble. Thea, on the other hand, was lionized. Her story now, with its dramatic second act, had elevated her to near mythical status. She was the woman who had been betrayed by her husband and her sister, and had emerged from the ashes not just a survivor, but a queen. But the public narrative was a far cry from her private reality. The victory was a bitter one, leaving a taste of ash in her mouth. She had saved her company, but she had lost her family. The sense of aloneness she had felt on the steps of her old home returned with a vengeance, a hollow ache in the center of her chest. In the weeks that followed, she threw herself into her work, a familiar refuge from the emotional turmoil. She restructured the company, promoting from within, creating a culture of trust and transparency that was the antithesis of what Chloe and Marcus Thorne had represented. And then, 2 months before her due date, her water broke. The birth was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, much like her life had been for the past year. But when she held her daughter in her arms for the first time, a tiny perfect creature with a tuft of dark hair and her own determined chin, the world fell away. She named her Hope, holding her daughter. Thea felt a profound shift within her. The anger, the bitterness, the pain that had been her constant companions for so long began to recede, replaced by a fierce, unconditional love that was both terrifying and exhilarating. This tiny, vulnerable human was her future, her legacy, and she would not allow the ghosts of the past to cast a shadow over it. A few days after she brought Hope home from the hospital, a letter arrived. There was no return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Chloe. Her first instinct was to tear it up, to throw it in the fire. But something stayed her hand. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The letter was not an apology, not in the traditional sense. It was a raw, rambling confession, a torrent of words filled with a lifetime of resentment, of feeling second best, of a jealousy so corrosive it had eaten her from the inside out. "You were always the sun, Leah," she wrote, "and I was just a planet trapped in your orbit. I wanted my own light, my own heat. I wanted to be the one people looked at with awe." She wrote of Marcus Thorne, of how he had preyed on her insecurities, whispering poison in her ear, promising her a world where she would finally be the star. She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't make excuses. She simply laid her broken, twisted heart bare. The last line of the letter was a simple, heartbreaking question. "Is she beautiful?" Thea wept as she read it. She wept for the sister she had lost, for the little girl who had lived in her shadow, for the woman who had been so consumed by darkness that she had tried to extinguish the light in everyone around her. She didn't know if she could ever forgive Chloe, if their relationship could ever be repaired. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too profound. But as she looked at Hope sleeping peacefully in her crib, she knew that she had to let go of the hate, for her daughter's sake, and for her own. She picked up her phone and sent a single photo to the number Chloe had written at the bottom of the letter. It was a picture of Hope, her tiny hand wrapped around Thea's finger. She didn't write any words. She didn't need to. The picture said it all. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed with a reply. A single word. Yes. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a happy ending. But it was a beginning. A tiny, fragile glimmer of hope in the wreckage of their family. Thea took a deep breath, a sense of peace settling over her for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Her past was a part of her, a story of betrayal and resilience that had forged her into the woman she was today. But it was not her future. Her future was here in her arms, a tiny bundle of pure, unadulterated hope. And as she looked out at the San Francisco skyline, the city that had been the backdrop for so much pain and so much triumph, she knew with a certainty that resonated in her very soul that the best was yet to come. The Queen had found her purpose not just in her empire, but in the quiet, unconditional love of her daughter. And that was a victory greater than any she could have ever imagined. 5 years passed. 5 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the quiet, joyful chaos of motherhood. 5 years of Athena's ascent, growing from a sensational startup into a global powerhouse, a billion-dollar company that had fundamentally changed the landscape for female entrepreneurs. Thea was no longer just a CEO. She was a philanthropist, a mentor, and one of the most respected figures in the tech world. She had built a new life, a good life, a life filled with love and purpose. Hope was a bright, inquisitive child, with her mother's brilliant mind and a compassionate heart that was all her own. They lived in the Pacific Heights house, the one Sophia had kicked her out of, but she had exorcised his ghost long ago, filling the rooms with laughter, with art, with the warmth of a happy home. Of Sophia she heard very little. His career had never recovered. He had drifted into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. He had tried once a few years ago to petition for visitation rights, a transparent and pathetic attempt to get his hands on her money. Isabella Rossi had shut him down so fast and so brutally that he had never dared to try again. Her relationship with Chloe remained a fragile, tentative thing. They communicated sporadically through texts and emails. Chloe had moved to a small town in the Midwest, had taken a job as an accountant, and was, by all accounts, living a quiet, unassuming life. The chasm between them was still there, a vast, silent canyon of hurt and betrayal. But the photo of hope had been a bridge, however frail, and they had not yet set fire to it. And then one day, the past came knocking. It arrived in the form of a certified letter from a law firm in Ohio. Thea, assuming it was some business matter, opened it without much thought. But the letter was not about business. It was about Sophia. He was dead. A sudden, massive heart attack at the age of 45. Thea felt a strange, hollow numbness. There was no grief, no satisfaction, just a quiet sense of an ending. A final, definitive closing of a chapter she had thought was long since finished. But there was more. The letter was from the executor of his will, and to her utter astonishment, Sophia had left her something. Not money, not property, but a single, sealed manila envelope. Against Isabella's strenuous objections, Thea had the envelope couriered to her. She opened it in the privacy of her study, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of apprehension. Inside was not a letter of apology, not a confession, not any of the things she might have expected. It was a collection of old photographs, of newspaper clippings, of faded handwritten notes. It was the story of a man she had never known. There was Sophia as a young boy, with a wide, hopeful smile, standing next to a proud, beaming father. There were articles about his father, a brilliant but struggling inventor, a man with 1,000 ideas and no business sense. And there were letters, heartbreaking letters from Sophia's mother to her sister, detailing her husband's descent into bitterness and despair as his dreams were crushed one by a world that didn't understand him. And then the final devastating piece of the puzzle. A yellowed newspaper clipping announcing the bankruptcy of his father's company, followed by a short, stark obituary. He had taken his own life, leaving behind a wife and a teenage son who had idolized him. Sophia had been shaped by that tragedy, by the specter of his father's failure. His ruthless ambition, his obsession with success, his fear of emotional instability, it was all a desperate, misguided attempt to avoid the same fate. He had not just been a monster, he had been a man haunted by the ghost of a broken dream. It didn't excuse what he had done. It didn't absolve him of his cruelty. But it changed the narrative. It made him human. And then at the bottom of the envelope there was one last thing. A small, tarnished silver locket. Thea opened it. Inside on one side was a tiny faded photograph of Sophia as a boy with his father. On the other side was a picture she had never seen before. It was a sonogram. Their sonogram. The one she had shown him, her face alight with joy, just weeks before he had thrown her out. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. A tear not of sadness, but of a complex, bittersweet understanding. He had kept it. Through all the bitterness, all the anger, all the hate, he had kept this one small, secret piece of them. That night she did something she hadn't done in 5 years. She called her sister. "Chloe," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "I think it's time we talked." The conversation was long and difficult, a painful exhumation of a shared and separate past. They talked about their father, a man who had loved them, but had never known how to show it. They talked about their mother, whose own unfulfilled ambitions had been projected onto her daughters. They talked about the shadows they had lived in, the roles they had been forced to play. And for the first time, they understood. It was not a complete absolution. The scars remained. But the wounds finally began to heal. A few months later, Chloe came to visit. She was quieter, more subdued. The hard edges of her ambition softened by a newfound humility. She met her niece for the first time, and as she watched Hope play in the garden, her face a mixture of wonder and regret, Thea knew that they had found their way back to each other. The legacy of Athena's ascent was not just in its billion-dollar valuation or its impact on the world of business. It was in the quiet, hard-won wisdom that had come from the ashes of betrayal. It was in the understanding that people are complex, that they are shaped by forces they cannot always control. It was in the power of forgiveness, not for the sake of the forgiven, but for the freedom of the forgiver. And as Thea stood on her porch, watching her daughter and her sister chase butterflies in the late afternoon sun, she felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was over. The Queen had not just reclaimed her kingdom, she had found her way home, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this was the story she would one day tell her daughter. A story not of endings, but of unforeseen and beautiful new beginnings. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of betrayal, resilience, and the birth of an empire from the ashes of a broken heart. Thea's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments can be the catalyst for our greatest triumphs. It's a testament to the fact that you can be kicked out, counted out, and left with nothing but still rise up and change the world. If Thea's story moved you, if it inspired you, if it made you believe in the power of a woman with a dream, then please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories of incredible women who dared to defy the odds. Your support helps us to continue to bring these powerful narratives to light. Thank you for watching.